everybody, and welcome to a Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production with episode 2 of our hero profile series. And I know I mentioned a bit with the Demos video that if there are heroes that me and Rob are somewhat less competent in, maybe just don't have as many reps in, and it would benefit viewers and ourselves. Honestly, I learned a ton from that Ultim video. Just to bring someone who just has way more reps in the deck, is way better at the deck than us, I would. And so, firstly, I'm joined by Rob, my co-creator, co-commentator, co-compatriot, and we're bringing in one more time. Probably this is the third video Yuki's featured in, I think. I think we got the drafting video, we got the interview video. I guess we have that gold foil short, so everyone should go watch all of those before they watch this video, so you can get all the different angles here. But we are joined by Miss Yuki Lee Bender, the Canadian Flesh and Blood national champion who won the national championships on this deck, to help us discuss the ins and outs of Lexi. Yuki, say hi to the fans.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be on the show.
Okay, so we're looking at another Tales of Aria hero. I know people are gonna probably wonder why we're not spreading them out a bit, but this is just how it goes. And Lexi is one of those heroes I feel that's it casts such a wide net. There's so many ways to build her. There's so many different strategies available, and it's a very, very interesting hero to talk about. So diving right into it, this is for anyone who hasn't watched our Ultim profile, just to give a bit background on what we're trying to do here. Is we're not really trying to do a deck tech. Yuki's done a bunch of different deck techs on the I know there's definitely one or two circling around YouTube, so if you want a very detailed deck tech on the decks she used to win Canadian Nationals, this is not the video for you. That being said, if you'd like to learn actually how to play Lexi and maybe some different builds to use and more ins and outs for building your own Lexi deck, then this definitely is the video for you. And so the first thing I kind of want to go into is talk to me about like the different Lexi builds out there. I know there's hybrid builds, there's more lightning focused, ice focused, weapon wise. There's the Death Dealer one that works a lot with Snapshot. There's Voltaire. I'm sure there's a Shiver deck out there. Are there any like key strengths some have over the other, and how do these builds fit into the current meta and possible future metas in your mind, Yuki?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a few different ones. You asked about the weapons. I agree that kind of Shiver, Death Dealer, and Voltaire are the main ones. Shiver hasn't seen that much play yet. I could maybe see this as a sideboard option for controlling decks, just for the on-demand dominate. But one thing that is awkward about it is that a lot of the ice effects give you dominate already. So sometimes it's a little bit redundant there, and I think that's kind of why it's probably the least powerful of the options. Voltaire is definitely the one that has seen the most play. I think that it is by and large kind of the strongest option. Just being able to load 2 arrows and having the on-demand go again is so good. It lets you attack 2 or 3 times a turn. 3 if you have a card in arsenal, and maybe you already have an arrow set up, and so you can go again, 3rd arrow. And that's just worth a lot. And it also unlocks 3 of a kind, which lets you draw 3 cards, but then only play cards from your arsenal. And Voltaire is just such a good enabler for that. And as Eric mentioned, there is the Snapshot Death Dealer combo. And basically how this works is if you fuse Snapshot with a lightning card, you can activate your bow an additional time as an instant. And so when you activate it as an instant, it doesn't take an action point, but it does have go again. So you get that draw a card and you get the action point back. So you can kind of chain together these snapshots and keep drawing cards and keep snapshotting. The build is a ton of fun. It's the build that I actually started on with Lexi, but I feel like it's a little bit on the inconsistent side. Like sometimes you 3 of a kind and you hit a bunch of snapshots and you really go off. And then sometimes you're sort of you draw a bunch of cards and you're like, well, I have these 5 cards in my hand that I can't actually use for anything. And that's sort of the problem there. Often the snapshot build also ends up playing a lot of like 0 cost lightning attacks, so you can go wide, and it kind of feels like Lightning Briar, but you don't get the embodiments, and you don't get the Runeblade armor. So I haven't seen too much success there, but I mean there's been a few that have made like top 8s and things like that, and it's a very cool deck and definitely a fun one to play, and kind of a sweet budget option too as well. But yeah, as far as the Voltaire builds go, There's been some ice builds that are kind of focused on disrupting your opponent, either through creating frostbites that tax them or making them discard cards in hand.
Right.
So that build's really good against aggro decks, and can be quite good against some control decks if they're just focused on blocking, but sometimes struggles into something like Oldham that is just really, really defensive.
Hmm.
And then there's the more lightning focused builds that play with like your like Frazzle and your Buzz Bolts and stack lots of these on hits that deal extra damage. And it's just a very, very aggressive deck that can really push a lot of damage. It's very hard to block out, but sometimes it can be it's very linear. It doesn't block very well. It doesn't really have many tools to disrupt your opponent, and so you're sort of just racing.
There's pure
And
damage kind of build.
yeah, so it's really good at pushing through against control. Like it's very, very hard deck to fatigue, but sometimes the other aggro decks can really take advantage, especially if you stumble a little bit. Like maybe you don't have as many arrows as you'd like. It can sometimes be hard to keep up. But the
Hmm.
deck is, when you draw well, it's really, really good. It does a lot of damage. Um,
Right.
it's kind of the main flavors that we've seen.
Hmm.
I do think there's more room to explore sort of like the hybrid builds that you mentioned. And we're
Right.
starting to see people do that. Like I've been seeing some Lexi players running ice quakes in their lightning builds, which makes a ton of sense. It kind of lets you board in that disruptive ice element, and it's just a ice quake's just one card, but it says that all of your attacks this turn gain if they hit make a frostbite, so it's sort of like a one card package to give you access to that, and so you could run like the blue ones and then board in like reds and maybe even yellows.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And so I've seen some of that. And then I think on the ice side there's also some exploration of maybe like ball lightning, lightning surge, and exude to get in kind of through some of the control
Control,
packages.
yeah. The
Mm,
exude especially
yeah.
to definitely try to push through all
Yeah.
that armor and the D reacts. But I definitely do like, as you mentioned, Ice Quake is just like really key, even like as a tech card. It's just so good at adding the one
Yeah.
thing Lightning Lexi doesn't have, which is on hits, and that's why a lot of times against decks like Briar, even early on, they just took all the damage, or they blocked it if they had a ton of embodiments and Lightning Lexi weren't blocking, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
those tools weren't there, but with Icequake there, it's very, very cheap. Like it's only costs one. It's not
Mhm.
particularly expensive, and it fits really well even with Lexi's own ability, right? Being
Right.
able to flip
Yeah.
for a frostbite. So it's a very, very
Yeah.
good multi-tool, like a hybrid build, I feel.
Yeah, and I think that's really what we're going to see with hybrid builds is that they lean heavily either to lightning or ice, and then they have a
Hmm.
few tools from the other element, and people are just starting to explore like how much can you incorporate without losing the identity of the deck.
Right.
Right.
It's hard to go like you're not going to get like the full like I'm running chilling ice veins and buzz bolts and frazzles and just like trying to fuse everything. Like you don't
Right. Mm.
it kind of doesn't work. Lexi just has
Mhm.
so many requirements of needing like half your deck, roughly half your deck to be arrows, and then you need a bunch of cards to fuse it, and you can't run all the different arrows and have the support to fuse it. There's just not enough space. So
Hmm.
usually you'll pick one and then sort of supplement with some of the more
Sprinkle.
flexible cards. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. I think as far as like what I think the when I was talking about the current meta, it's definitely changed a little bit since Canadian Nationals, at least bringing in
Hmm.
different kind of. I think it's the age of the rune blade, but I'm sure the New Zealanders and Australians beg to differ. So maybe they'll change their minds in a couple weeks. But at the moment, what I'm seeing is a lot of different rune blades, either the mid-range combo Viscerai or like a the channel mount Briar, even the lightning Briar with some additions. So even
Hmm.
chain, so those kinds of things. But there's also other heroes creeping into the meta. Like Oldhim is definitely pretty good in the meta now as into various decks, various aggro decks, and even Bravo and other heroes come back. So what do you think as far as Lexi in the current meta? Is there anything that kind of stands out for you against these kind of newer decks that weren't tested as much beforehand?
Yeah, so I think the meta is definitely shifting a little bit more mid-range with especially with those Guardian decks coming in and sort of being
Mm.
able to, and Lexi to some degree being able to slow down the Lightning Briar deck.
Hmm.
So you kind of have the more mid-range Runeblade builds now. I think that the Ice build is still pretty well positioned into just about all the Runeblades. You're pretty good at just disrupting them. They usually want to have lots of cards in hand, and that's sort of exactly what Ice Lexi is good at working against, is it doesn't let you have those cards in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
So I found Lexi to be pretty favorable into all the Rune Blades, and the Bravo matchup is quite close. But again, the Oldhim matchup for Ice is really tricky, and yes, Lightning does have a pretty solid Oldhim matchup, but then you struggle into the Rune Blade. So right now, it's sort of like you either have to make a meta call and hope that you're not going to be facing too many Oldhims, or you need to figure out a way to make that matchup.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not like favored, maybe make it closer to 50-50. So
Yeah, less worse. But I mean, you've done meta calls in the past, so who's to say you can't do it in the future here? And
Yep.
talking a little about the possible future meta, we haven't got any Everfest. Well, we've got a couple spoilers. We have like two cards. They're like we have like the new Blitz hero, and we have
hero. Yeah.
was a life of the party. I think is the new
Yeah.
spoiler. But as far as like the new meta or possible future meta, Yuki, what do you think Lexi like? How these different builds could stand to gain, or maybe if they'll change in popularity, maybe in a new meta.
Yeah, we'll have to see what we get from Everfest, of course. But if the past has been any indication, it seems like, and we see this in other card games too, that usually the aggro decks are really fast out of the gates, just because it's easier to build a proactive strategy than one that has to interact with the opponent. So usually early on in a meta, aggro is pretty good, and I imagine that would put Ice Lexi in particular in a good position, just because against most aggro decks that we've seen, she's very, very strong. I guess it depends on the flavors of aggro. Like if the decks are very good at operating on both high resources as well as like medium level of resources, kind of like Dash, where she can always she can use her whole hand, or she's happy to use two cards, and she'll kind of make good use of it no matter what. If there's decks like that, Ice Lexi's not as good. But yeah, I think she could be very well positioned into that kind of a metagame. I think in the more mid-rangey metagame, though, with the current card layout, it is hard to strike the balance to be able to deal with both the more aggressive as well as the more defensive strategies. So I think when it trends more mid-range, Ranger has a little bit of a harder time, just because the deck's not quite as flexible as some of their shells. You don't have that weapon to you do have a weapon, but not one that attacks.
Yeah, a consistent source of damage. No, that's fair. So we talked a little bit about Lexi, what she can excel at based on different builds and weapon choices. But as far as what she struggles with overall, taking either your own Lexi deck as an example, does Lexi? I know you said you already talked a bit about her benefit in a control, mid range, or aggro meta. But are there some builds in particular you think definitely are more extreme to, let's say, super aggro meta than a heavier ice Lexi build would be better? Or if it's more control, then you're trying to strike more like lightning build or go wide. Is there something that Lexi really struggles with in that particular meta?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what you said. Like if you know that it's going to be all aggro or all control, you can kind of go ice or lightning depending. That being said, I think kind of like more generally than just metagame, what Lexi really struggles into, there's kind of two main things. The biggest thing is Ranger is also very card hungry. Because you basically always need to pitch to activate Voltaire, you basically always need two cards, and it'll be like, if I have two cards and I have an arrow, I spend two cards, attack for 6, something like that. Like it's kind of like a Guardian thing, except that it also takes cards from your hand, and then a bunch of your cards block for 2, so you don't block that well. So the deck is very, very card hungry, and so other decks that have lots of detrimental on hits, like Bravo, or funnily enough, like Ice Lexi, the mirror can be quite tough. Those decks really kind of give Lexi trouble. The other end that she can struggle on is sort of the fatigue aspect, where because she doesn't have the weapon to grind out value, you can run her out of arrows. She's a little bit less prone to this than Azalea, just because Ice has so much dominate, and she can also go very wide. Like Voltaire alone is enough to let you go wide. So it's quite hard to block out Lexi. Like I actually don't think that most heroes can do it. Like I think Bravo needs to more kind of like race and play the game with Lexi rather than just sit there and block. But Oldhim in particular really is able to kind of put up that wall, and it can be
Yeah.
hard to push through. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the pull she kind of struggles with. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Talking about Lexi herself, so the hero power, specifically the flip for the Arsenal card, being it lightning or ice. How important is it to activate on each turn? Is it specific to like a different Lexi builds? Do I essentially always need to put an ice or lightning card in the arsenal to flip it on my turn, or does it kind of depend on different factors?
Yeah, it really depends. I think that so it kind of depends on the matchup. If you're ice, the ice card in Arsenal, flipping it up and making a frostbite, is very, very, very good into some decks. Like against Briar, it's a huge priority getting that ice card to flip up.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, you're also pretty happy putting in an arrow into your arsenal so that you know that you have that third attack.
Right.
So Ranger's very much a deck that wants to set up and sort of like people talk about Ranger being high variance, and one of the ways you get to reduce that variance is by arsenaling attacks and having those attacks kind of ready to go even if you don't use them, and that way you always have like a backup plan. And it's like, well, maybe I didn't try an attack, but maybe I can, I don't know, like endless arrow plus lightning press or something, and then I at least have a turn, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Ranger really wants to set up in that way, and yeah, in certain matchups, the ice is really good, either stopping defense reactions or just slowing down a deck like Briar that doesn't have that much pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And in the lightning decks, I would say that getting lightning cards in Arsenal is pretty nice, just because it's sort of often it kind of enables your other lightning cards. Like you can, I don't know, you can lightning surge from hand if you flip up a lightning card, because like normally lightning surge only has go again from your arsenal,
Right.
but then lets you play it from hand to kind of get that extra attack in. So generally you do always want to be arsenaling something, and of course the element cards are huge value, but definitely don't be afraid to arsenal an arrow, or even don't be afraid to activate Voltaire, put in an arrow, and then arsenal an element card to go with it, so you can kind of set up 6 card hands. I think that's one of the maybe one of the most important skills for Lexi, is just figuring out like when do you set up these 6 card hands versus when do you kind of push harder and pressure your opponent more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just had a random addition to that based on like your comment about six card hands. Do you like going first or second? Just as a general washover, because I know like if you go first, you pretty much guarantee your six card setup, and kind of
Right.
yeah, depending on who you're versing, it could be really really good. It also could backfire, of course, depending on what you're letting your opponent keep. But do you like going first for that reason, or do you prefer second? I know this depends on the matchup and how aggro you want to be and tempo and all that kind of good stuff. But is there any kind of general rule you have or no?
Yeah, I think Lexi almost always wants to go first. Um, the combination of like she doesn't really want to block anyways, so then you kind of just get to like set up and really grab tempo with 6 cards, is just so good. Sometimes there's also cards you can play out to get additional effects, like especially in the ice build you might be able to throw out like an amulet of ice or a channel like frigid and just kind of get even more value on your first turn. So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you play an amulet of ice, you arsenal 2 cards, and you're just so far
It's pretty
ahead.
amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you mentioned the channel, it's like if you get channel down turn one into an aggro
Yeah,
matchup, six card hand, you just win pretty much on the spot, or at
Right.
least I feel you
yeah.
do.
Yeah, you have so much tempo at that point, and
Mm-hmm.
and again, by setting up that kind of whatever those 6 cards are, like the ideally some, like the one thing you don't want to do is put 2 arrows in your arsenal, but if you have
Right,
like a lightning, any lightning card or an ice non-attack, you can kind of set up 6 cards and guarantee that on your next
Right.
turn you're able to hit them, and you're really able to either put so much damage out as lightning or as ice, really kind of slow them down. I guess
right.
as lightning in the more aggro matchups, sometimes you might want to go second just to kind of be the first one to start racing.
Mm-hmm.
As good as the 6 cards is, like sometimes just getting hit hard on the first turn is like it hurts you more than the extra 2 cards in your arsenal does. But for ice, for sure, you basically always want to go second, because it kind of lets you, like usually the more cards you have, the more you can stack up those detrimental effects, and the harder you can make it for your opponent to just sit back and ignore you.
Have you thought of any considerations against Kano specifically? since I know he likes to go second.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happens when you're staring Kano in the face in CC?
Because Kano has seen a lot of popularity, especially I think in Europe. We've seen, or it might have been Asia. I forget which region, but I
Oh, it
think we
was
had like
the
a second
Italian.
place or first place. It was Italian. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Italian nationals I think was the first place Kano.
Right. Yeah.
Totally.
Just
Yeah,
curious.
no, Kano can be scary. I haven't played the matchup a ton, but I still think that going first is generally pretty nice. Um, you just get to hit so hard coming back, and
Mm,
and it's
yeah.
it's very hard for Kano. So like one of the big tricks is like against a Kano, I might want to say like pitch a card, put endless arrow in with go again, and pass priority.
Mm,
And if they do try to, it's very risky for them to try and get value out of
yeah.
that first turn because they don't know how hard. Like if I'm floating 2 resources here, like I could potentially hit him pretty hard if he
Right.
whiffs, and if he
Right.
doesn't whiff, I get to still set up my 6 cards. So it feels like you kind of have
Yeah. There's room for a bit of a mind game there.
yeah, totally. Whereas I feel
Yeah.
like some other classes
It's more
like
obvious
Bravo
what they
doesn't
want to
have that
do.
opportunity, for
Yeah.
example, where it's sort of like, well, he can attack and commit to the attack, and then Kano knows exactly what's coming, or he might not even have a good attack on his first turn. So,
Mm,
yeah.
That makes
awesome.
sense.
Yeah.
As far as equipment goes, outside of the weapon, I guess it does depend on the weapon, but is there like a proper equipment loadout for Lexi? Does it differ other than like which bow you're choosing, or is it essentially build dependent? You bring in that equipment for almost every matchup, minus maybe like some arcane barrier for the matchups you need that.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of equipment pieces that are somewhat set. Like New Horizon in particular is really, really important. Um, just having that second arsenal really lets you do so much, both in kind of like reducing variance by making sure you have arrows, making sure you have detrimental effects ready for the next turn. New Horizons really, really important. And actually, I forgot to mention it before, but I think that's part of the reason Death Dealer is maybe not as good in Lexi is that it says that you can only put an arrow card into your arsenal if you have no other
Mm,
arrows. Or sorry, if you have no other cards in your arsenal. So New Horizon doesn't like it does work with Death Dealer, but it's not the
It's
most
not as
useful.
yeah, it's not as synergistic as it is with like cross wrap, obviously.
Yeah, so it's a little bit awkward there. You can't really utilize the second arsenal as well as you'd like, and I think that this is one of the greatest strengths that Lexi has, both against aggro matchups because it lets you be more consistent, as well as against control matchups since it just lets you kind of build up your resources and then push them all out at once more than they can block with their 4 cards. So this is by far the most important piece of equipment. Um, if you're playing ice, I do think the shock charmers is good, and even in lightning, I think shock charmers is very good. It just lets you push some extra damage. But in ice, especially, just being able to double up on your important
Yeah, all the on hits,
all the
effects.
ice quakes, or yeah, the
all the
arrows.
chilling ice vein. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, the chilling ice vein and blizzard bolt. It doesn't work with ice quake since that requires a hit, but it works on these two since
Oh,
it's whenever they
sorry.
deal damage.
That's right. Sorry. Yeah.
so you're
Yeah,
just
no,
adding
it's super confusing.
That's right.
adding additional sources of damage with charmers,
Yeah,
just procs it
Right.
again and again and again.
Right.
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 So I think in the ice deck it is pretty good. But that being said, if you were looking for kind of like a budget option, you definitely could play bullseye bracers as well. I think it's pretty solid, and just getting the extra, being able to load the extra arrow can really help. It can just be that extra attack that you need. Um, on a 3 of a kind turn, if you don't have an arrow in your arsenal already, sometimes you're just stuck doing 2 attacks, which is good, but it's not great. And usually that third arrow is really kind of the one that pushes it over, and sometimes bullseye bracers lets you do that. So I think that's a good option in the in the hand piece as well. So either one of those. For the boots, I really like perch grapplers. Just the block is really, really powerful, but I think there's some merit to snaps. I've been exploring this a little bit, especially if you start bringing in cards that like Exude or like maybe Snatch or something like that. Just having the guaranteed go again is really nice.
Yeah.
So I think there's some room there for sure. And then chest piece is usually Tunic, but Tunic is sort of it's nice. It gets you value throughout the game. It's definitely good. Heart of Ice can be used for the Arcane Barrier and against some of the control matchups, but again, Heart of Ice is sort of like much more of a sideboard card. I really just bring it in against Oldham at the moment, and maybe it's something like
Kano or something. Yeah, I can't really see it as useful as, even if you bring in like Bullseye versus any of the Rune Blades, it still has Arcane Barrier 1, which I totally forgot about when the first time I played it, and like, this actually has more utility than I thought. But no, that those equipment make sense as like a general kind of loadout. So now that we've talked about equipment, how important is blocking in Lexi? Do you need to block at all? I'm sure there's plenty of Briar players that say the answer is no, but when you're playing Lexi, do you have to block? And does it kind of matter on if you're playing Ice or Lightning? Because I can only imagine in a Lightning Lexi deck. I mean, I've played a lot of the Lightning. That's the one I've played a lot of. I hate it. Blocking just hurt my soul so much when I want to like light it up with like some crazy press turn or something like that and do maximum damage. But as far as like the Ice builds or the hybrids or even the Death Dealer builds, is there importance in blocking in those builds?
So in general, no. I guess there's some like I have seen some Ice Death Dealer builds that sort of like played Death Dealer as a value card and maybe some Polar Blast, and they can block with if they have extra arrows because they know they're only going to use the one. But in general, in the Ice builds, your main tool to stop taking damage is just slowing your opponent down, especially against aggro. Against control, sometimes if you know you're going to take a setup turn, it can make sense to block. But kind of like what you were saying, like just your efficiency gets brought down so much if you have to end up blocking with a bunch of cards. So like for example, this hand, if I end up blocking with, well, I couldn't block with those two cards. If I block, well, in this case it's especially awkward because Pulse doesn't block, but let's say I could block with like Pulse and an arrow.
Right.
At this point I'm attacking you for 6 with no on hit. That's so much worse than being able to, like, maybe if I have a Tunic I can do 5 and 6 with like a Chilling Ice Vein and a Blizzard Bolt, fusing both of them, and then not only that, I get to Arsenal the Pulse, which gives me the Frostbite the next turn.
The Lexi is
and
so
the
good.
Go Again. So yeah, having like you get so much value out of arsenaling cards that it's really and also out of fusing them that it's so hard to justify that block. Sometimes there are kind of key spots where you would want to do that. Some of them, one of the ones to look out for is like if you know your hand is not very good. So for example, let's say that instead of this blue Ice Quake, let's say that I have a red one. Here my hand is really kind of poor. Like let's say again I have that Tunic on 3, so I could get that extra resource, but it's really kind of awkward, right? Like maybe I pitch this one, attack and fuse, and then I kind of have like a leftover card. Sure, I could block with this card for 2, but it's not really that exciting, right? This is an attack for 6. I get a Arsenal the Pulse. That's okay. But in this case, I might be really inclined, like with the Tunic up, I might be really inclined to do something like, especially if they show me a scary on hit, just to go, well, I'm going to block for 5. I'm fine doing that. And on my turn, I can use Tunic to put in Chilling Ice Vein, and I can just Arsenal this Pulse. And then my next turn, I know I'm probably going to be throwing like a 9 Go Again on hit, discard or pay 1. Whatever else I get, like it's going to be a really good turn. And so sometimes if you know that your turn's going to be kind of mediocre and you can set up and make your next turn like really good for sure, that can be well worth it. And sometimes if they throw like Command and Conquer at you, or you're under like a channel like Frigid and you can't do much, you'll block. But most of the time you're more trying to
keep up the pressure, put more pressure on. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, I know you mentioned the New Horizon as being like quite a instrumental card in letting you get those like 6-card hands and those tempo swings, but let's say that you wanted to try out different somewhat it doesn't have to be like the highest competitiveness Lexi deck out there, but something that can get some wins. Are there any key like must-have cards for Lexi, and why are they key?
Yeah, so for most builds, I think Voltaire is pretty good, and the New Horizon that we talked about. I think the Tunic you could pretty easily skip. bullseye bracers is really nice. And then for the boots, you could run snaps, or you could even run perch grapplers. The unlimited non-foil printing of these isn't too bad at all.
Right.
But if you're not wanting to throw it out for a 2-block, by all means, just use snaps. It's totally fine. For a chest piece, like maybe like a deep blue could be pretty nice for a budget option. Just giving you that consistency, because the all red hands really do hurt. The deck's pretty resource hungry. In terms of the non-equipment pieces, like a lot of these cards, like a lot of the ice and ice arrows are not expensive cards at all, and aren't really a very good entry, but do a lot of work. Like Remorseless is a common arrow, but I don't actually think, like, if you were really wanting to be budget, you could replace this with a headshot. I don't think it's that great. But Endless Arrows is incredible with Voltaire. Just it hitting for 4 and then having basically like it's kind of like an on-hit draw card is really, really, really good. And it costing 0. It's just like one of the better arrows, and it's not particularly expensive. And probably the other really big card is 3 of a Kind here. 3 of a Kind is just like one of in my eyes, is one of the biggest reasons that Lexi is as competitive as it is just that Voltaire has unlocked the potential of 3 of a Kind. And I think that, I think if Azalea could use Voltaire and could use 3 of a Kind, she might actually be, I don't know if she'd be top tier, but she'd be a lot better.
Competitive, at least, yeah.
Yeah, like you could get wins with her much more easily than right now. So yeah, I think that's a really big deal.
Fair enough.
And I guess we've seen also that like the price of 3 of a Kind has kind of gone up a bit through.
It's tripled, as they say.
Tripled, has it? Okay.
No, it's definitely a really important card and just does a ton of work. And it's the kind of thing that, like, the more it's the kind of card where the more cards that come out that support it, the better it's going to be.
Yeah.
Like if you got a Ranger legendary that lets you load an arrow once a turn or something, like this card is crazy, right?
No, it's broken. Don't say that. It's broken.
Just going to get better and better. I'm not saying they're going to get that, but I'm just saying, like, that's
you seem to think we're talking about a Runeblade character. That's not what's happening here.
Yeah. And then I guess other than that, like if you're playing Ice, you'll want your Ice Majestics, the Channels, good, the Frost,
which are still very cheap.
I feel like that's kind of like the big benefit for Lexi is that a lot of the cards in Lexi are from Tales, and Tales out of all the sets is going to be the cheapest. It is the newest. There is a lot of unlimited out there. It definitely helps to make this deck overall more budget friendly the less cards it uses that are staple from the other sets, either being from out of print or just being high price in general. That kind of leads me into my last question here for you, my last topic, which is
one more thing before you do that. For anybody who is looking at picking up Lexi, I think that, like, as much as like these core cards are really good, I would pick up both the Lightning and the Ice cards. You're already investing so much, like in the New Horizon and in the Voltaire and in the 3 of a Kind, that picking up a full set of the Lightning cards, you can probably do it for like $20-$30. And then you have so many more options available to you down the road if the meta changes, or if, who knows, everfest comes out with new support. So I think if you're like, you can start with one of them, but I would go the extra step and get all of the cards. It
becomes like low-hanging fruit at that point, right? It's just like might as well grab those to be much more versatile into different types of matchups.
Exactly, and then you have like a whole bunch of different decks and a whole bunch of different builds you can experiment with. So I think it's kind of nice. You get a lot of flexibility for not very much cost.
No, that's fair. It's a nice thing you already brought up everfest for me, because that's the last thing we're talking about here. The next set coming out, I believe February 4th, with previews coming out, I think the last week of January. I think it's the last week of January. And so, Yuki, in your mind, does Lexi need anything in everfest, or want anything, or is there some kind of key combo that, based on the cards you see, you just need like this one little push off the edge? Before they call you a Runeblade?
Yeah, there's a few things that Lexi could benefit from. I think one of the big ones is for Ice Lexi, another Ice Fusion arrow. Like, you do have Flake Out, which gives Dominate and chilling.
I guess Frostlock.
You have Frostlock, and you have chilling Ice Vein. Is it that's like a channel like frigid type effect only on your turn?
Right.
And those are fine, but they're not great. And I'm not exactly sure what it would be, but like if they got another good fuse arrow, that would be huge.
Yeah. Maybe one that lets you reload.
Yeah, perhaps. Like I don't know, like something there would help the deck because you're sort of like really sometimes you don't have as many good fusion arrows as you would like.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt they would do this, but if we got more double element cards, like even just one double element card you could play 3 of, it would really open up a lot of space for running hybrid builds.
Right.
Like it really shifts the math quite dramatically, but I think
Right.
Ellis also understands those cards are really powerful, and it's not a mistake that they've printed it at Legendary. So I don't know if we'll see that. Maybe just more equipment could be really cool. Like some of the Ranger equipment, like Perch Grapplers is fine. It blocks 2, but it's not exciting. Tunic's solid and gets work done, but it's not like a class equipment. Like I think there's definitely room for there to be cool equipment. I think some way to I don't know if they will do this because it's sort of like part of the identity and how arrows work, but it'd be cool if there was some sort of way to like generate an arrow token of some sort, so you almost have like a pseudo weapon, even if it's at a poor rate. That's something that I would love to see, but again, I don't know if
like a magical quiver.
yeah,
something like that
would be really really sweet.
Fair
So that's
enough.
kind of what I'm hoping for, and then maybe something to help Azalea because she's I don't know.
She needs it.
She needs it. I like her a lot, and
There's a reason why you started on Azalea and now you're on Lexi.
yeah, just give her like another bow or something like Voltaire.
Give her a new horizon. That, you know, let's red the ledger, get just a little bit more red. But that redder into ledger, I would buy that card. The mat is really nice. I'm getting off topic here. I'm talking about the mat now, but yeah, no, I definitely agree that I think out of all of those, the equipment is probably the most likely in my mind, given the given how Crucible worked and Everfest trying to support it the same kind of way. Every class got equipment. However, it's a little bit trickier unless your set just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because there's more heroes than there were when Crucible came out, right? So I'm not sure how they'll swing it, but I definitely think Ranger equipment, I do agree, leaves a little bit to be desired as far as
the chest piece, especially.
The chest piece, yeah. I mean, Perch Grapplers we got in Crucible, but the base level of Ranger equipment was, I feel, slightly weaker overall, but I could be a little bit wrong with that. But the ability to have more options in different slots, especially in the chest area, even for the boots. I mean, Perch Grapplers is okay, but you know, it's like genre. I feel like it's good, but it could get a slightly better option for different builds.
I think the hands too, like
oh yeah, the bullseye is a little
bullseye's not the most exciting.
It's okay. It is a common, so I think there is room for a majestic archer. Ranger, like archer. Sorry, a majestic ranger arm piece, because I don't think there is yet, right? So
no, there isn't. And like, I don't know. As much as I love Shock Charmers and I think it's an incredible card, there's definitely matchups where it's like, well, I'd love to run something else, but there's just not really a good enough option to justify.
Yeah, or give something with like a like one piece of arm, like one armor, and then has kind of more of a recursion effect that doesn't cost as much, like a one energy effect that helps in some kind of utility way. I think that would help quite a bit. That would be like a generic that any ranger can use, rather than being like lightning that Azalea cannot use or something like that, right?
Right.
So I definitely agree with that, and that's everything I had. Appreciate you coming on the show, Yuki, talking about all your infinite bounds of knowledge on Lexi. Obviously, it served you well, and hopefully it'll serve our viewers well as they hope to foray into the probably the easier ranger at the moment to actually be successful with, but you never know. In Everfest, that might change. But appreciate your time today, and from me and Rob, appreciate all our viewers watching. We do have the videos without the sweepstakes, so the sweepstakes is over, and we'll be announcing the winners of those shortly in other videos. For any other content, check out our Spotify and our YouTube, as well as our Twitter, where I'll be posting discussion and release timings ahead of regular schedule on the YouTube. So feel free to like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, and check out Spotify and Twitter. And with that, team is Spark of Genius, as well as Yuki, wish everyone a good day, good evening, whenever you're watching this video. Bye for now.